Then next, we have the young researchers and the students as well, and I want them to take part in our panel discussion. And I would like to also invite Dr. Kammen and Professor Low. And we would like to now hold the panel discussion with all those participants. In this facility, we do have some of our students here as well, but there are all sorts of students that are from all over the world here in this facility as well. So not just a student from Japan, but from Asia, Africa, South America, the students from Europe. And we also have the students from Japan as well. And we would like to have all of those global students take part in this panel discussion, because this topic is about the collaboration of the smart society in a global context. Therefore, I would like to invite your active involvement. I also would like to encourage the people here from this room as well. So if you have any questions or comments that you would like to address, then I would like to welcome those as well. So with that, please engage in this session. So with this, I would like to pass the microphone over to Mr. Sato.
Well, they would like to enter into a panel discussion engaging the students. The theme is the importance of international cooperation for achieving a smart society. And we have with us students from overseas who are studying in Japan, and we have had them gather for this occasion. We also have two Japanese students on the panelists. And of course, we have our two experts who have presented the keynote speech, and Dr. Daniel Kammen and Dr. Low, who will be offering their comments. Firstly, I would like to introduce the students in the order in which they are seated. Farthest from where I am, we have Ms. Shi Zhou from China. It's a pleasure to be here. Representing Japan, and Daiki Yamashita. A pleasure to meet you. And we have Dr. Martin Mahuha from Slovakia. And from Paraguay, Mr. Andres Lima. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'll just skip the commentators. And with Mr. Raymond Tam from Malaysia. It's a pleasure to be here. And again, a student from Japan, Mr. Takamasa Wata. Pleasure to be here. And we have Mr. Bilasami Yusuf from Nigeria. Pleasure to be here. And these students, even while they are from overseas, are very fluent in the Japanese language. I have asked them to speak in Japanese. However, two of the panelists have resisted, and the two will speak in English. But of course, we have simultaneous interpretation, and therefore it should not be a problem. Of course, the commentators, Dr. Kammen and Dr. Low, of course, please speak in your English language. And today, there are several issues that we will take up for discussion. And we are curious as to how the young generation will respond to these challenges. And also would like to engage the audience in this thought process. And that is the design of this panel discussion. The first question: do you think that nuclear power plants are necessary in order to provide energy now and hereafter. The backdrop of this particular question naturally is because of the highlighted issue of carbon dioxide emission and also the growing energy demand, which gives rise to questions as to how to keep the balance between energy production and a clean environment. Up until March 11th, one valid solution was nuclear energy. However, March 11th has exposed the catastrophic risks associated with nuclear accidents. And given this backdrop, as we consider the balance with renewable energy sources, we need to consider the options available. I have also indicated there's primary energy and energy balance. Energy demand will continue to rise globally, and this is also an important factor that we need to put into the equation. And we would like to inquire as to the thoughts of the students. I'd like to first begin with Ms. Chu. My answer is no. My name is Xu from China. Domestically in China, there are coal power plants which accounts for a large proportion of the energy generation powered by coal. However, when it comes to Japan, Japan does not have natural resources such as coal, and therefore Japan has promoted nuclear energy generation. However, in order to proceed, one option is to depart from the nuclear option. And in lieu of nuclear energy, I believe that it is important to take for an uptake of renewable energy sources, and most primarily solar-powered generation, which can be generated in our homes and buildings. We need to build a structure in which we will be able to capture solar power to generate electricity, and this will have to be complemented with smart power. An alternative to nuclear power, I think there are many technologies that are available to us. Mr. Shuji, you believe that the response is a no, and you're against nuclear power plants for now and for the future. And now, Mr. Taiki Yamashita. I have a different position. I believe that nuclear power, I think, is the realistic option right now. And also in the future, we need to sustain nuclear power. Of course, renewable energy is being highlighted. And after March 11th, because of the shock waves that have engulfed the national public, there has been an aversion to nuclear power. However, it is still not realistic to depend on renewable energy sources for now. The reason is because if we are to do so, we need to change the grid. We need to have introduce changes in the grid, and also there are other issues such as a cost issue that confronts us. So these are the major challenges. Until there is a breakthrough that will resolve all these issues, I believe for now nuclear power is necessary by which to respond to the growing energy demand. And if there is an energy source that will replace nuclear power, and I do not believe that it is realistic to believe that there is an alternative source that is entirely risk-free. That being the case, I think it is important to control the risk so that we are able to coexist. Thank you very much. Mr. Martin Machuha?
For this question. So if we want to ask the question whether we will use the nuclear power generation or whether we should use the nuclear power generation, for the future, I think there are several factors or many factors which we need to consider, and I pointed out a few of them. So over the years, I believe the economic feasibility, and high energy demand were the key drivers which made a decision for nuclear power generation, and also they became the major potential source of energy for sustainable society, as nuclear power generation is relatively low carbon. And but after Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident, I believe there is a tremendous change, and now the no economic feasibility is questioned anymore, but the safety is questioned all over the world. So maybe I have, as an engineer, two views. One is the global view, one is a view for Japan. So as a global view, I still believe that nuclear power generation has the least impact on the human health when we compare per watt generated by this power generation. But so therefore I say yes for global usage of nuclear power generation for future. So, but regarding the Japan, I have a little different view, because Japan sits on the ring of fire. Japan has this problem, and also the social aspects. I think it's very hard to explain for people after what has happened last year, that nuclear power generation is necessary for the future. So therefore, I believe I would be happy if there is one day when there is no active nuclear power plant in Japan in the future. So basically, this is my answer. Globally, I say yes, but for Japan, I think for future, no. I believe now it's not possible to stop it, because there are not real alternatives at the current state. But I think government should maybe invest into alternatives, into research in alternatives, in geothermal energy, tidal energy, and many other maybe opportunities in Japan. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
はい、どうもありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. I would like to continue. And I would like to inquire Mr. Andres Molina. My Japanese is not very good. If you'll pardon me, I would like to speak in English.
Question. Yes, indeed. I mean, yes, for both periods. The most important thing is, from my point of view, is to people to be happy with the resources they are used to obtain outcomes. If, for instance, we change because of a shock, which actually was the problem in Fukushima with the earthquake, the people will suffer a lot because the people will pay more money for energy. So governments don't want to do that, probably because they will lose the confidence of the people, and of course they will not win the next election. So it's a huge political and social cost. I believe in mix. I believe in to mix different sources of energies depending of the actually the inputs of the country and the regions. That's the reason why I put this slide here, because you can see the concentration of nuclear power plants around the world, and you can see, here you can see two variables, which is actually the position, the location of these power plants, and also the risk related to the earthquakes. You can see here that there are 3 regions around the world which are really high concentrated in terms of nuclear power plants, and Japan is not the safest one. That's the problem, but we cannot change that reality for an overnight. So my answer to this question is, okay, let people to be happy, keep the output in the same level, try to introduce some changes in the power sources, and obtain a profitable, comfortable mix of energies for the different uses. That's my answer. Thank you so much.
はい、どうも森谷君ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. I'd like to continue. Raymond, Mr. Raymond Tan. As far as nuclear power is concerned, the logics have evolved around cost. As far as cost issues are concerned, I think that we have looked at the cost on a yen base, or it could be a renminbi or a dollar basis, but in terms of monetary value, and that's where we started off. And that was the axis under which we talked about the safety and also a necessity. And that is how the logics were constructed. However, March 11 and afterwards, there were new developments that arose to the surface. What do I mean by that? For example, issues of health and also environmental issues and also our lifestyle. What's most important is that what can we hand over to our next generation? These were the questions that arose in our minds. And I think that March 11th was one opportunity, since we have come this far. We need to think about the future. And I think that these issues presented themselves. Well then, as we engage in discussions, how should we best go about entering into a discussion? I believe that there are various angles from which various experts can be engaged, and also people living in the community should also be engaged in the discussions. And when we conduct the discussions, the format, we should also include other alternative energy sources into the discussion. Dependency on nuclear, that should not be the presumption when we enter into a discussion.
Okay, then, Mr. Wada. I would say that we won't be able to get rid of the nuclear power immediately, but I think that we should do that in a short period of time. I know that there are some nuclear power stations in problem right now, but these stations have already been utilized for more than its lifetime. So gradually it should be decommissioned so that the actual new investment that was already originally designed to be put in place should be reflected onto the renewable energy sources. And our lifestyle would have to be changed as well. The energy is not eternal. Therefore, the power has to be generated and has to be utilized in that region. And I think that this concept has to be expanded. And as it says on number 5 here, I would say that the amount of the percentage of the nuclear power stations in terms of total power is the 15th. But when it comes to transmission and distribution of power, we rank at number 3, meaning that our country is highly dependent on nuclear power plant. So the risk and the cost, and I think the both balance has to be revisited. And right now, I think that we're taking way too much risk simply to satisfy the convenience of people. So I think that this balance should change. Okay, at the end, Yusuf. Now, when it comes to the nuclear power, as an energy source, I think it has to be used. Because from the lifestyle perspective, I think that when it comes to the infrastructure, in order to sustain the infrastructure, the energy source has to be utilized in a needed manner. For example, train system cannot be supported by wind power, for example. And I think that this would have a tremendous impact on the global supply chain. And in order to overcome the problem caused by the nuclear power plant, I would say that the existing power plant would have to be fine-tuned in order to make it safer. That's for sure. And there's a master city in Dubai, and I think that that kind of a city would increase from this point on. And I think with that in place, some of the issues can be resolved. Thank you. Well, we do have overseas students studying here in Japan, and we've asked the question as to whether they're for or against the nuclear power plant. Originally, I was assuming that all those students would say no to the nuclear power. However, it wasn't really so. The person who said no was just one. Rather, majority of the students says that we already know the risk. Therefore, we would still have to rely on the nuclear power, knowing that the safety aspect has to be improved. And in a long-term perspective, obviously, the nuclear power has to decrease. However, for the time being, in order to support the demand of power, the nuclear energy would still have to be utilized. And I think that this was very interesting to know of. And I also would like to ask the question to all the people here in this room as well. The reason for that is because that last week on newspaper, it stated that it's better to get rid of the nuclear power station, and then it's better to set a certain amount of period in order to move into utilization of renewable energy. However, it seems like what it says on that newspaper versus majority of the student thinks in mind is way too off. Maybe people doesn't necessarily think that way. Therefore, I would like to also pose the question to the people here in this room as well. So who thinks that nuclear power has to be completely gotten rid of? That's one answer. And the second one is that in the long-term basis, I think the nuclear power has to diminish. However, you need it for the time being. Or in a long-term basis, the necessary technology should be developed so that we should get along of the utilization of the nuclear power as well. So the first question, when it comes to nuclear power energy, who thinks that the nuclear power should be completely gotten rid of? Raise your hand. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, then who thinks that when it comes to the nuclear power, it would not be gotten rid of immediately? Even if it's going to shift towards renewable energy, for the time being, we still have to use the nuclear power. Or in the future, take necessary safety measure to avoid risk, and then at the same time, still rely on the nuclear power plant. Raise your hand. Thank you very much. Well, I would say that the opinion of yours and the opinion from the panelists, I think, are in line with one another. Rather than getting rid of the nuclear power plant immediately versus still have to deal with nuclear power plant having the necessary safety measures in place, I think that the latter is more than the former. So I would say that would be the majority here from this room. And Dr. Kammen, I would like to ask you a question now. Earlier, in your keynote speech, you have mentioned about the risk and CO2 issue, and also how to think of energy as a whole. And I think you've explained that in your presentation. Now, listening to all these comments, what's your opinion on this?
Students' comments, we heard the range of the sentiment of what we would like to have, from phasing out nuclear power to a practical sense of Japan is a very densely settled, very industrial economy, and finding short-term substitutes is difficult. And I think that the other piece of the story is that all energy systems come with a risk or an impact. And even the ones that I would like to champion myself, like solar, there are issues. There's issues of land area. You highlighted the issues of land area. There's exotic materials. Nothing comes for free in this regard. But it's also quite clear that having a single dominant energy technology poses a different kind of risk. And even if it works perfectly well, that risk is the lack of innovation. Because one of the problems in this area is monopolies do not lead to innovative researchers, innovative utilities, innovative policymakers, and diversity is one of the best angles to promote that creative competition. So recognizing where Japan is now, and as horrible as the disaster was, it is hard to see a rapid phase out being practical. It's also an issue that these discussions have to also bring the utilities along. In most places, utilities are not seen as the most innovative and progressive. Even when they're very good, they're not generally seen as agents of change. That's a sad fact because a great deal of expertise resides in utilities. The kind of conversation you heard here is really one about diversity, innovation, and achieving the system you want. And I think the way you best have that is when there's a clear social agenda, and I think we heard a desire to phase down or phase out, but recognizing the realities. And putting utilities, putting large industrial customers into that conversation as participants, not as dominators, is, I think, really the goal. Different countries will come up with different mixes on that. For example, Germany has also said, we see the need to phase out nuclear power. However, what Germany is doing in the short term is restarting coal. And in the long term, that's not acceptable because we know the damages of coal are severe, and we know the signaling effect. If industrial advanced nations can't find a way to phase out coal, they send a message to everywhere that coal is okay, even without carbon capture or pollution benefits. So the sentiment we heard here has to be brought back to kind of what we say as the leaders, industrial leaders, political leaders, and diversifying away from any given dominant technology. Coal in the case of the United States, coal in the case of China, nuclear in the case of Japan, super high dependent on hydro in certain South American countries where all the power comes from one source and sometimes one dam. None of these are recipes for innovation. And ultimately, everything we talked about today was about how to make our energy system more innovative.
どうもありがとうございました。ダニエル・カム先生。では引き続きまして。
Okay, thank you very much. Now, the comment from you, Professor Low. What's your take on this?
You know, Singapore is a very different country from many others. We are what we call price takers. We're not price givers. Price takers means whatever people give us and sell to us, we take. So what Daniel has put forth is something that we see as a very real step forward in ensuring that, innovation, creativity, and scientific knowledge is put to good use such that there's balance in terms of balance between the cost and impact. Because moving forward, any solutions we see as is described has got an impact on what we do and what we on our usage and consumption and on the world we lived in. So the key is trying to optimize with whatever we have. But I think we should also should not disregard the possibilities of new breakthroughs in science as well. But that is serendipitous in some sense. So moving forward, I share a very, very common view and platform with Daniel that, moving forward, the key is actually competition. And competition actually gives rise to an impetus to drive innovation and, putting our creative juices such that, we come up with solutions that work for us.
どうもありがとうございました。
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now, when it comes to the nuclear power energy, of course, there are a lot of issues that needs to be resolved. But as one particular direction for the future, there's one opinion that we should completely neglect the nuclear power dependency. However, I think that we should consider that nuclear power should be one option of an energy source, and then think for the other energy sources as well at the same time. And we would like to come to some sort of outcome at the end of this panel. So let's move on to the next question. The next question that's posed has to do with how to consider the global warming issue, especially from the viewpoint of economics, engineering, and politics. From the variety of facets, we would need to think of the global warming. And the IPCC have issued a report in 2007. Dr. Daniel Kammen has involved directly himself, which has to do with the relations between the global warming and human industrialization and its impact on the society. And how would this achieve the sustainable society? And all those are actually interconnected to one another. So let's move on to this question. And by the way, this is the impact association with global average temperature change. And it's a graph of that, which I've shown you earlier. Now, Yusuf, can you give us your answer on this question? Now, from the economic perspective, especially people living in the developing countries in like villages, when it comes to the micro science, for example, and I think that we would need to look at the ways to not to hugely negatively impact those people. And at the same time, we would need to look at the utilization of minimizing the use of energy. And also the government, once it's decided, I would want them to pursue that until it's achieved. Thank you, Yusuf. Next, Mr. Wada. Now, changing our lifestyle, especially when it comes to the GHG emissions, I think it has to be minimized to the extent possible. However, if you think of the business aspect, you cannot stop the assembly line or the factories immediately overnight. Therefore, for that, we need to think of utilization of different sources of energy, such as renewable energy, and pay necessary fees for that energy and establish the market so that the renewable energy market exists to transact those energy sources. So generator selling the energy would be able to make money at the same time with using the renewable energy. So such a backup plan has to be brought in place and has to market. And by doing that, the value amongst people would change, and I think the eco view would penetrate amongst people.
Thank you very much. Next, the answer is from Raymond. This slide is not very easy to understand, so I'd like to explain this slide first. So personal means, well, the person. So I would like to give alphabet A for personal for this box, and this associations, researchers, and companies. For this box, I would like to give a B alphabet, and the governmental policy. This box is the box C. So let me explain about these boxes A, B, and C. Asia and Malaysia likewise. We are all Asians. And at any countries, the political situation is changing always, and then nuclear power generation has been promoted as a government policy. However, I think probably we can change the top-down approach from the bottom-up approach. The top-down approach, which is the conventional method, the C is always working towards A and B, but in your day-to-day living, the B is doing practical researches. And then based on the research and development, A will receive the outcome, which is the finished products. And then A, the person would give a feedback to researchers, companies, and associations. Then, and if the feedback shows that something needs to be penetrate the society, it should be given back to governmental policy, reflected in the governmental policies. to be deployed across the country. Thank you, Raymond. Molina, the next answer comes from Molina.
Meaningful question for me, because I'm an engineer, and I am here in Japan because of the politics and economics. I mean, the thing is, we have three things going around, and we really want to or need to understand which is the trigger in order to change the status quo, right? The thing is really, really interesting here because economics and politics are extremely related. What I'm saying this because actually the Fukushima event, the disaster, which is a terrible loss for all of us, it's also a trigger. Probably that's the reason because we are here. And that's a kind of push that engineers need to, in order to change some things. And actually that's the reason why the public opinion pushes the politicians and also the economy in order to come up with different solutions. What I mean with this is there's a linkage between the global warming, the relevance of the acts and investments, and also the time frame because of the business cycle. We need to respect and we need to understand the business cycle, which actually are really, really important in terms of incentives and in order to increase or decrease the possibilities to change the dynamics of the status quo do you know what I mean? The dynamics of the status quo, which is the research and normal research, and then something very, very strong like the Fukushima event came up and we have to do something. The result of this is politics and economics are really related, strongly related, and this actually pulls the trigger in order to increase the preferences about the research. So we need to take an advantage of this in this really moment in terms to speed up the results because more resources will be allocated for this and we have to, in a sense, enjoy this moment. Thank you so much.
どうもありがとうございます、森名君。続いて、マチュハソマルティさんお願いします。
Thank you very much. So actually to answer this question, I think there are 3 points, economic, engineering, and politics, but I don't find myself capable to answer about economics and politics. I would like to answer as an engineer from my major, which is ICT. So I believe ICT can play a key role in resolving the problem of global warming. Basically, in 2010, I attended in Sendai one international conference, and there was a first session on green communications. And one of the things which were pointed out there is like 2% of overall ICT of carbon dioxide emissions are caused by ICT, which is quite low, right? But what is more important, by ICT we can actually decrease the carbon dioxide of many other industries by applying. There was one nice sample from one Swedish company, ICT company, which made a contract with huge transportation company in Sweden, and they could save tens of percent of carbon dioxide, reduce the tens of percent of carbon dioxide emissions, and also save the money by employing the ICT into transportation system. We could see a very nice example of Dr. Kammen or Dr. Law when Dr. Kammen pointed out the micro inverters to employ in the solar system. Also, Dr. Law employed into ITS, the ICT. So I believe ICT can play an important role for the future to resolving the global warming. Thank you.
はい、どうもありがとうございます、マーチン君。続きまして、山下君、よろしくお願いします。
Next answer comes from Yamashita, Mr. Yamashita. With regard to the global warming, the usage of energy and the generation means to generate the energy must be changed. This pie chart, with this, what I would like to tell you is that if you can draw your attention to cogeneration is the biggest source of the CO2 emission, followed by household operation, road transport, and other industries. by reducing the emission in these sectors, I think this could be a very effective countermeasure for global warming. So how can we change, what does it mean to change the way of electricity demand and supply? At the household, we can change the ways we use the electricity. And very often it is discussed that the demand response, a smart house, smart community, those issues are very much mentioned. And by these things, we can change the ways we use the electricity at household. The easiest example is that we can increase the efficiency of the coal-fired thermal power station, or we can introduce more renewable energies such as the photovoltaic. So in the low carbon sustainable society, if we are to materialize that, we need to invest into such areas to counter the global warming. Thank you very much. Finally, Shuchi. Like Morina and Martin, I'm an engineer. So I couldn't really think of any measures related to politics and economics, but I would like to force myself to focus on economics and politics and try to figure out what could be the impact on economics and politics as a result of global warming. In terms of economics, I think likely impact is the rising food prices, and then a storm damage can be anticipated. And then rising sea levels is one of the concerns. And finally, in a very cold region such as Russia, there will be lower heating bills for cold countries. In the area of politics, when well, maybe there are a huge migration happening to the people who are living in the area where the rising sea levels. So the government, academia, and industry have to join their forces together to counter these potential issues as a result of global warming. I think this is related to the first question. So, Dr. Low, perhaps you can comment on this question and answers first.
Very interesting. It is impossible to devolve engineering solutions or scientific solutions from economics and from politics, right? We're dealing with people. We are people consuming energy. But I think, you know, just as you listen to everybody, I think we need to look at this a problem not only in a first order perspective, but also a second order and third order perspective. I think the second last one, there's a chart given by, you know, where the carbon footprint, you know, which industry produces the most carbon, generation using coal. But, you know, the generation of electricity using coal, that's consumed by household, that's consumed by industries. So I think the second order analysis of how we consume, how industry consumes needs to be taken into consideration. And it's intractable that needs to be addressed too. As an example, you know, there is a new movement towards remanufacturing rather than, you know, for example, in heavy equipment, if you have a jet engine, rather than, you know, scrapped it, you know, Rolls-Royce, Pratt & Whitney, and GE Aviation are now looking at remanufacturing these engines. And the remanufacturing, giving the same performance of what a new engine would do, costs only 20% in terms of water and energy resource, right? So that is one direction to go. So if you are to solve a problem just taking one perspective, I think, you know, we will be going against a hard wall. So I think you need to look at it from multiple perspectives. And we cannot solve this here today, but I think we can set the stage in terms of the way we think about how we resolve this problem.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kammen. Would you like to comment on this?
So the students were very polite because those with technical backgrounds generally gave technical answers and strayed a little bit into the other issues. But when you get to be my advanced age, you can be less polite. And I feel as a scientist that when economics is convenient, we use it. And when it's inconvenient, we ignore it. And this is a failing of scientists like myself who try to speak out but don't say it clearly. It's a failure of political leaders and of industrial leaders who favor the status quo even when the status quo is poisoning us. And the problem here is that we know that if you want industry to change course a little bit or a lot, you have to send them a signal. And we also know that when you send industry a signal that is clear and consistent, the level of innovation is remarkable. When we tell industry tomorrow morning, turn this off and turn that on, that's an unreasonable request. When we say, over the coming decade or 2 decades, we want to do this, and we will give you market-based incentives to help you, they do it. Global warming is exactly in this category. And yet we've allowed ourselves, the United States is perhaps the biggest culprit of not doing this, but we've allowed a problem that we know market signals would help to go on without having the courage to instill those market signals. We have pockets. Europe has started a market signal for carbon, and yet until recently they left off transportation and goods and services. That's cheating. California starts its carbon price later this year, and they include these things. But California is only 2% of global emissions, so we'll see. China, biggest user of coal, is starting a carbon market in 5 provinces in 2015. If the United States and others don't get serious, China will have a carbon market before we do. This is lunacy. Not that China's not being impressive, but that we should be braver, and we should, if we think economics is true, we should use it. And the fact that major industrial countries haven't chosen to put a price on carbon, even a low price, because it sends a long-term signal to innovate, just shows that we're either not good enough scientists or not good enough advocates, but we're not putting, what we say in English, we're not putting our money where our mouth is.
Okay, どうもありがとうございます。そろそろ実は時間がですね、だいぶ押してまして、
I think we are running out of time, but we would like to cover all the remaining questions first.
Following up on questions number 1 and 2, in order to solve the issue of global warming, this cannot be an issue that can be undertaken by a single country alone. It is necessary for countries to collaborate in order to jointly resolve this issue. And therefore, is this possible? Well, we would like to begin with Ms. Xu Ji. When it comes to combating global warming, this is not an issue that can be undertaken by a single country alone. Be it China or Japan, it is important to go beyond borders and to think as Asia, so that we are able to together consolidate a standard. And that is what I believe to be the best way forward. Thank you very much, Ms. Shizu. Well, then I'd like to go over to Mr. Daiki Yamashita. When it comes to combating global warming, what does the international community have to do? And first of all, be it advanced or developing country, we need to strike a win-win relationship. What I intend to say by using the phrase win-win relationship is the following. The advanced nations provide, for example, high-efficiency generator technology to the developing countries or otherwise provide financial support. There are also other technologies that deliver on low-carbon society, and these are instruments that advanced nations can either sell or help introduce into developing countries. And naturally, this is designed to be a win-win relationship, and therefore, we need to think from the other perspective. What can the developing countries do? When it comes to new technologies, the test bed can be provided to advanced nations, either leased or sold, or otherwise trading on carbon emissions. We need to depart from relationship where one depends on the other. It is important to together create a win-win relationship. And by so doing, on a global basis, we will be able to make advances in terms of measures to combat global warming. Thank you very much, Mr. Yamashita. I would then like to go over to Martin-san.
So I would like to point out in this question for the future of collaboration 2 points. One is awareness and one is consensus. So why awareness? Basically, when you look into developed countries like in Europe or US and you ask the people about the global warming and climate change, you would be surprised about the answers. So the public opinion in general usually doesn't consider the global warming as an issue, as a major issue. Therefore, I think it's important to work on this to change the public opinion and work on this in order to push by people, politicians for the future to consider this as an issue. Because we have many local issues, right? We have economical problems, we have tax problem, pension system, healthcare, whatever. But these are local issues which are directly affecting us. But we don't see that the global warming is affecting us, so therefore also we don't consider or don't maybe require from the politicians to have it as a one of the questions they want to solve. So this is the problem of awareness, I believe. And also the consensus. So once we achieve this public opinion and we will be pushing the politicians, there is need for political consensus, the global political consensus on the solution. So definitely there are different views, for example, different views in China or different views in Europe, also within the US we could see different views, but there should be unified goals. There should be unified goals which we can achieve. And another point is technological consensus in technology like standardization. So for example, in a smart grid, as I can point out, if we create, every country creates own standards on smart grid, and there is no interoperability between them, it doesn't work, because bigger is the smart grid, the more reliable is the system, more effective, efficient is the system. So the overall standardization is important. And the last point is responsibility. So again, it's related to awareness. So once we are aware of this, once the public people are aware, then they can realize what is the responsibility of them, what's the responsibility of politicians, and what is the responsibility of engineers. Thank you.
はい、どうもありがとうございます。マーチン君どうもありがとう。では次。
Thank you very much. And then, Mr. Andres?
Because this is a really broad question, allow me to answer in a broader way. For me, the key of this probably it's the collaboration among equals. What I want to say and mean with this, just 4 words: trust, coordination, priorities, and knowledge. And allow me to explain a little bit more each of these words. Trust is, in a sense, technical and financial cooperation, considering all the parties as partners. I mean, both worlds, developing and developed countries, are based in terms of environment as a public good, right? And the public good is a kind of, also have a lot of free riders. So now, developed countries are free riding the natural resources from developing countries, and we are free riding the technology because we didn't spend anything in that technology. And the thing is that to avoid the top-down cooperation probably could help in order to achieve a consensus, which is the next word, coordination. And in this issue, I think it's really important to not be in the frontier of in research, because for developing countries, sometimes the really ultimate technology doesn't work. We need to downgrade some technologies in order to increase the use of that technology and achieve some global goals. The next word is priorities. I want to say this in a very specific way. Cardinal priorities, not ordinal priorities. I mean cardinal, it means that we have to rank all the priorities and try to identify the consensus between two worlds. And the last one, knowledge, is the research in appropriate technology levels. For some countries, current technology is fancy and almost useless. So to downgrade some current technologies to fit local needs could be a very interesting way out to build a better and more broad-minded world. That's my answer.
はい、どうもありがとうございます。では、レイモンド君、よろしくお願いします。
Raymond-san, in modern society, I think one of the key features is that there are behavioral experts. However, the features of these are that, and what I believe is an issue is this: in each of their activities, there are certain logics that are unique to their field, and in their positions, there are rhetorics. However, when we try to look at the bird's eye view, we need to consider what will make our lives more fulfilling and what will make lives happier. However, there seems to be a missing link here. And therefore, what can be done? For example, the nature of the symposium, such as today, through these symposiums, we have people from the engineering world, and there are those from the non-engineering world, such as myself, by where we come together, in which we exchange views and also information. I think this will become an important piece of the entire puzzle. And not just depending on symposiums, we also have other means, mass media, internet, and also study tours, by which, under what logic, each individual have built their views and how we are impacted, and how can we build on these perceptions to build a better life. We need to build a network, and I think that is crucial. What is important? I think disclosure of information and exchange of information would be the valid keywords. Thank you very much, Raymond-san. And now, Mr. Wada. When we think about international collaboration in the academic field, information is being exchanged, for example, through symposia. However, when it comes to the business circle, Japan has still fallen short of becoming international. As we try to become a smart society, there are system management. There might be people with the same lifestyle in Tokyo and Shanghai. If that is the case, we can link the cities with life management systems, or we could draw from the experiences of other cities. I think these instances will arise, and that is one way in which international collaboration can be stimulated. And of course, I believe that lifestyles are different from ethnic groups or from countries. We should not think about building from zero base, but we need to really capture the inputs. And lastly, Yusuf-san, this is my personal view. Japan and Africa, there have been technical transfers whereby it has been done on an official government-to-government level. And that is how the technical transfer has proceeded. But there, from the government level, they look at the technology, and all they can do is to capture the information and return to their country. And that is what we have seen repeated. But we need to have students in the recipient country, as well as companies in the recipient countries, and also the overseas students studying here in Japan to be engaged. the students in Japan understand the technology, and also if such students are able to engage in exchange of information with students in their home country, this will also help human resource development as well. The government, of course, is a valid actor because they're an important part of the process. There's a government and there is a private enterprise. But the private enterprises are interested in delivering products because they're in the business of making a profit. We need to build a social engineering platform in the recipient country so that there is a base to absorb technology. Japanese companies, when they go to Africa, they have followed the so-called typical ODA pattern, but that's not quite right, because with ODA you give and you seek nothing in return. But as a private company, you need to give but seek something in return. They will look at the issue, they will conduct a study, and they will develop. But after that, the manufacturing will have to be done in the recipient country, using the resources in the recipient country to localize. And they will have to study the consumer patterns in the local market and build a business model on top of that. And the product will be converted into services and then expand into a business. I think that is the right way forward. We have covered question 1, 2, and 3. These are all interrelated, of course. And this is a manner in which we have thrown the questions to the students. And lastly, we would like to seek some comments from the experts, Dr. Kammen and Dr. Loh, if you have any comments to offer.
Countries around the world are very good at mitigating something that has happened, rather than collaborating on doing something that could do us good. If you look at how countries get together to help a country when there's a disaster, the post-Sumatran tsunami, everybody get together. So we are very, very good at that. From a Singapore perspective, if you look at this, our wish going forward, Singapore is a very small country, so we always wish and we will participate in whatever conventions that, are signed. Our hope is that, governments around the world will be generous enough to do what they can to the extent that they can in engaging each other to take up the responsibility of resolving the global warming problems. On the mitigation side, no country can escape something that is happening in another country. And Singapore realizes it. Because of the El Nino effect, because of the change in rain patterns, and because of the slash and burn situation we get in Sumatra and Kalimantan, you get actually peat fires, and it pollutes the air, and actually the smoke actually gets blown to Malaysia and Singapore. So we are hundreds of miles away from Sumatra and Kalimantan, but we face the impact of bad practices in that country. So we then get together as ASEAN. The ASEAN, is a unification organization for the 10 ASEAN countries. And we say, let's help one another. We are good at that, but we should actually move forward and see how we actually prevent that from happening in the first place. And then globally, that's what we should do. But as scientists and engineers in academia, there's a lot we can do to come up with scientific solutions. But we need to ensure that our voices are heard, and just as Daniel said earlier, make sure the politicians have the political will to work with one another, cross boundaries, to actually try to resolve problems before they emerge. And these problems we face are actually global challenges, and it needs to be resolved at a global scale. So collaboration is inevitable. It's a question at what level.
はい、どうもありがとうございます。最後になります。
Okay, thank you very much. So, Dr. Kammen?
I think actually we heard some of the key statements here about acting as partners that are equals and making sure that these collaborations happen because we're all living downstream of somebody. And so I think that's the really key feature. And actually, what the students said is in many ways the most interesting because My generation does not necessarily come from a time when we thought about these global issues as equals. There is no question that the old style terminology of which country is developing and which one's developed, which one's first world, which one's third world, these are meaningless terms today. It's much more about this global commons. And so I'm actually going to just listen to the students and stop here, because the real issue is a change of mindset. And I actually think I hear more of that change of mindset in people younger than me. So congratulations to all of you.
どうもありがとうございます。もうほとんど時間がなくなりまして、少しオーバー。
Well, thank you very much. The time is already up and I'm a little bit running behind. But is there any comments from the floor? Then I would like to open the floor.
素晴らしい
I think it was a wonderful discussion. But one thing that I would like to stress here, I think that there's always something that we should not leave any downsides behind to our next generations. I've asked all the people to raise hand whether you wish to stay with nuclear power plant or not. And I actually wanted to raise my hand for in between. The global paradigm is no, like get rid of nuclear power generation immediately. However, when it comes to the nuclear power plant, as myself being a scientist, I think that the scientists would have to keep on challenging to bring the most safe way of utilization of nuclear power. Because one of the major problems of the Japan case here is that the scientists have become too complacent, that in some cases they had to lie to protect themselves. And however, scientists are the scientists after all. We are the one who is in the utmost position in order to handle this sort of issue. And therefore, what you want to do from an engineer perspective versus the national consensus being this and that, therefore we should do this. And I think there's two different aspects here. And I think that the logical aspect has to be separated. And I think there's a mixture between the two at this point in time. So Japanese people, I think that is now put in a place where we need to have our own thinking and logic in order to challenge the other. And I think that this kind of issue would require a certain logical statements in order to handle this issue. Politicians should understand it, the general public would have to understand it, and I think that how to have them come to a common ground to discuss this matter would become necessary in the future. So I am hoping that you would be able to contribute to that in the future. Well, thank you very much. Well, the time is really up now. Therefore, for the discussion upcoming, could maybe be extended into the reception that's planned this afternoon. The students will be there as well. So if you wish to talk further, then please utilize that time. With that, we would like to close the panel discussion with the students. So the students who participated in the panelists and Dr. Kammen and Professor Lowe, thank you very much for being with us. And let's give a big round of applause to all the people present on the stage.